The fastest way to destroy justice is to decide who someone is before you learn their name. Morning traffic rolled steadily through the wide streets leading toward the state capitol as commuters hurried to offices, courtrooms, and government buildings under a bright spring sky. Philip Peterson drove with both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel of his dark gray sedan, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who never felt the need to rush. He had quietly dismissed his official driver that morning. The state attorney general had always preferred the silence of driving himself whenever protocol allowed. It was one of the few moments in his day when the weight of public office gave way to ordinary life. Although his office assigned both a state vehicle and a security driver, Philip had dismissed them that morning. He preferred driving himself whenever his schedule allowed, believing a public servant should never become too comfortable with privilege. At 42 years old, the black attorney carried himself with calm discipline, his gym-fit frame filling a tailored charcoal suit, while a neatly folded burgundy tie rested against a crisp white dress shirt. His side-parted hair was perfectly groomed, and beside him sat a weathered brown leather portfolio that had accompanied him through years of public service. Inside rested one document he rarely showed anyone anymore, his Harvard law degree. To Philip, it was not a trophy. It was simply one chapter of a lifetime devoted to the law. A police cruiser pulled into traffic several car lengths behind him. Officer Jacob Caldwell scanned passing vehicles with practiced confidence. At 33, the white patrol officer had earned a reputation for making quick decisions, believing experience allowed him to recognize suspicious situations almost instantly. His handsome, angular face remained expressionless as his blue eyes settled on Philip's vehicle. What first caught Jacob's attention was not reckless driving or a traffic violation. It was the expensive leather portfolio resting openly on the passenger seat. Within moments, his emergency lights flashed. Philip calmly activated his turn signal and pulled onto the shoulder without hesitation. Before Jacob even reached the driver's window, Philip had lowered the glass and placed both hands where they were clearly visible. "Good morning, officer," he said politely. Jacob barely acknowledged the greeting. "License, registration, and what is inside that portfolio?" His voice carried more suspicion than curiosity. Philip handed over his driver's license and registration before glancing toward the leather case. "Personal documents," he answered. Jacob frowned. "Open it." Philip complied without argument, carefully lifting the portfolio onto his lap and opening the worn clasps. Resting inside was a framed diploma protected beneath a transparent sleeve. Jacob leaned closer. The gold seal immediately caught his attention. "Harvard Law School," he scoffed, followed by a short laugh that sounded more dismissive than amused. He looked Philip up and down for several long seconds before shaking his head. "You expect me to believe that belongs to you?" Philip met his eyes calmly. "It does." Jacob's lips curled into a thin smirk. "Come on. People from neighborhoods like yours don't usually graduate from Harvard Law." Philip remained silent for a brief moment before answering quietly. "Officer, you don't know where I came from." "I know enough." Jacob shrugged. He reached through the open window, removed the diploma before Philip could stop him, and examined the frame for only a few seconds before shaking his head again. "People carry fake credentials all the time." Philip remained composed. "Officer, you have not verified anything yet." A passing couple slowed their pace along the sidewalk, noticing the unusual conversation. One quietly raised a cell phone but remained several yards away. Jacob ignored them completely. "I know enough when I see it," he replied. Philip answered with steady restraint. "Respectfully, assumptions are not verification." Jacob smirked as though the statement only confirmed his own opinion. Without checking Philip's identification through dispatch, without examining the diploma carefully, and without asking another question, he pulled the Harvard Law degree from its protective sleeve, bent the heavy presentation cover sharply in his hands, and let out a sarcastic chuckle. "That is one less fake credential on the street," he said. Philip's eyes remained fixed on the damaged cover, but his voice never rose above a calm, measured tone. "Officer, are you absolutely certain you want your next decision to become part of the official record?" At that exact moment, Jacob's patrol radio crackled to life before he could answer. Dispatch spoke with unexpected urgency. "Unit 12, before taking any further action, verify the full name on that driver's license again. Please repeat the driver's full name." Jacob Caldwell looked down at the driver's license still resting in his hand before pressing the transmit button on his shoulder microphone. His confidence remained unchanged even after dispatch interrupted him. "Philip Peterson," he replied, speaking each word with deliberate certainty. There was a brief silence on the radio, longer than normal. Jacob frowned impatiently. "Dispatch." The response arrived a moment later, calm but noticeably more careful than before. "Unit 12, please spell the full name exactly as it appears on the license." Jacob sighed quietly, as though the request had become an unnecessary inconvenience. "Philip, Peterson, Peterson." Another pause followed. Philip remained seated inside his vehicle with both hands visible on the steering wheel. He never attempted to retrieve the damaged diploma or argue about what had already happened. The only movement came from the breeze gently lifting the edge of the transparent document sleeve that now rested empty on the passenger seat. Jacob noticed Philip watching him, but interpreted the silence as weakness rather than restraint. "You are unusually calm," Jacob remarked. Philip answered without hesitation. "Staying calm protects everyone involved." Jacob gave a skeptical smile. "People usually become nervous when questions begin." Philip met his eyes. "People also become nervous when they realize they are not being treated fairly." The words hung quietly between them. Several passing drivers slowed as they noticed the patrol vehicle parked on the shoulder, while the couple standing nearby continued recording from a respectful distance without interfering. Jacob glanced briefly toward them before returning his attention to Philip. "Step out of the vehicle." Philip spoke evenly. "Officer, may I ask whether my identification has been verified? I asked you to step out." Philip nodded once. "I will comply." He slowly opened the driver's door and stepped onto the shoulder exactly as instructed, keeping his movements measured and predictable. His posture remained composed despite the damaged diploma still resting in Jacob's hands. Halfway through the encounter, dispatch transmitted another message. "Unit 12, our system is processing the identity inquiry. Please stand by before taking further enforcement action." Jacob looked toward his patrol car with visible impatience. "It does not take this long to verify a driver's license." Dispatch answered carefully. "Affirmative. The inquiry is still pending." Jacob shook his head. "I do not need a computer to tell me what I already see." Philip quietly replied. "Verification exists because appearances can be misleading." Jacob ignored the comment and walked toward his patrol vehicle, placing the driver's license on the hood while entering additional information into the mobile computer terminal. For several seconds, the screen displayed only a rotating processing icon before a notification suddenly appeared across the monitor. Jacob narrowed his eyes as he read the message twice. "Identity verification pending. Do not proceed with custodial action until confirmation is completed. Contact supervising officer if necessary." He frowned in disbelief. During years on patrol, he had rarely seen such wording during a routine traffic stop. Instead of waiting, he closed the notification and returned to Philip. "Computer systems make mistakes," he said dismissively. "People do not always become who they claim to be simply because a screen says wait." Philip answered with the same calm voice he had used from the beginning. "Neither do they become someone else because another person assumes they are." Before Jacob could respond, his patrol radio sounded once more. This time the voice belonged not to dispatch, but to Sergeant Naomi Morgan. "Unit 12, this is Sergeant Morgan. Hold your current location. I am on my way, and until I arrive, I do not want you taking another step in this stop." Jacob Caldwell lowered his radio without responding immediately to Sergeant Naomi Morgan's instruction. For the first time that morning, uncertainty slipped through the confidence that had guided every decision he had made since activating his emergency lights. Philip Peterson remained standing beside his sedan with calm composure, his hands relaxed at his sides, and his attention fixed on Jacob rather than the growing number of passing vehicles slowing to observe the unusual traffic stop. The damaged Harvard Law diploma cover rested on the hood of the patrol car beside Philip's driver's license, a silent reminder that one decision had already crossed a line that could not be undone. Jacob finally answered the radio. "Copy, Sergeant. I am maintaining the stop." His tone remained professional, but it lacked the certainty it carried only moments earlier. Several miles away inside the communications center, The dispatcher responsible for Jacob's inquiry watched an uncommon series of messages appear across her terminal. The initial driver's license verification had completed successfully, but the associated government profile immediately redirected the inquiry through a restricted state database that ordinary traffic stops rarely encountered. Instead of displaying additional personal information, the screen instructed the operator to notify a supervisor before releasing any further details. Following established procedure, she forwarded the alert to Sergeant Morgan while continuing to monitor the inquiry. At nearly the same moment, inside the office of the State Attorney General, Executive Assistant Ella Lewis checked her watch for the third time in less than 5 minutes. A confidential legal briefing involving agency leaders was scheduled to begin shortly, yet Philip had not arrived and had not answered his secure office phone. That alone was unusual. Philip had built a reputation for arriving early to every official meeting. Ella calmly contacted his driver, only to learn that Philip had chosen to drive himself that morning because his vehicle was being serviced. She then attempted his cell phone. The call went unanswered. Her expression changed from mild concern to professional caution. She quietly notified the Attorney General Protective Detail that contact with Philip had unexpectedly been lost during travel to the capital. Back on the roadside, Jacob continued watching Philip with visible skepticism. "You still have not explained why you are carrying that diploma around," he said. Philip answered evenly. "Because I plan to speak with law students this afternoon after my meetings. They asked me to bring it." Jacob folded his arms. Convenient explanation. Philip simply nodded. The truth often sounds convenient once it has been verified. The statement lingered in the air. Jacob had no immediate reply. Inside his patrol vehicle, the mobile computer emitted another notification tone. He opened the updated message, expecting routine confirmation, but instead found a second advisory replacing the first. Supervisory notification acknowledged. Identity record transferred to protected review. Await further instruction. Jacob stared at the screen, puzzled by language he had never encountered during an ordinary stop. Before he could process it further, another patrol unit approached in the distance. Sergeant Morgan's vehicle pulled onto the shoulder with its emergency lights flashing briefly before coming to a stop behind Jacob's cruiser. Morgan stepped out, composed and purposeful, immediately scanning the scene rather than accepting assumptions. She noticed Philip standing calmly, the damaged diploma cover resting on the patrol car, and Jacob holding an unverified driver's license. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Jacob," she said in an even voice, "tell me exactly why this driver's identification has still not been fully verified, and explain why a personal document appears to have been damaged before the stop was completed." Before Jacob could answer, dispatch interrupted once again with unmistakable urgency. "Sergeant Morgan, Communications has just received an inquiry from the Office of the State Attorney General. They are attempting to locate Philip Peterson immediately and have requested confirmation of his current status." Sergeant Naomi Morgan acknowledged dispatch without taking her eyes off the scene before her. Years of experience had taught her that unusual situations rarely announce themselves with dramatic moments. Instead, they revealed themselves through small details that no longer fit together. A routine traffic stop should never trigger inquiries from the Office of the State Attorney General. She stepped toward Philip Peterson first, maintaining a calm, professional tone. "Sir, I am Sergeant Naomi Morgan. I appreciate your patience. Are you all right?" Philip gave a slight nod. "Yes, Sergeant. I have complied with every instruction." Morgan glanced briefly at the damaged Harvard Law diploma cover resting on Jacob Caldwell's patrol car before returning her attention to Philip. "Has there been any physical confrontation?" "No," Philip answered. "Only assumptions made before verification." Morgan understood immediately why those words carried weight. She turned toward Jacob. "Walk me through your decision-making from the beginning." Jacob remained convinced he had acted reasonably. The diploma appeared suspicious. He claimed it was from Harvard Law. "I believed it was fraudulent." Morgan asked the obvious question. "Did you verify his identity before reaching that conclusion?" Jacob hesitated for the first time that morning. "Not completely." Morgan did not raise her voice. "Procedure requires verification before conclusions, not after them." While the conversation continued, Ella Lewis stood inside the office of the State Attorney General speaking with increasing urgency. Philip had missed a confidential briefing involving senior state officials, something that had never happened during his tenure. Following established protocol, she notified the executive protection coordinator that the Attorney General had unexpectedly become unreachable during official travel. Within moments, Special Agent Victor Hayes received the notification while reviewing security assignments nearby. After confirming Philip's planned route, Victor instructed his protective team to respond immediately to the reported location provided through state communications. Maintain coordination with local law enforcement, he directed calmly. Assume this is a welfare verification until facts establish otherwise. Back on the roadside, Morgan requested Jacob's driver's license return. Jacob handed Philip's identification to her without comment. She examined the card carefully before entering the information herself through the patrol vehicle's secure computer terminal. Unlike Jacob, she waited patiently for the inquiry to complete. The system processed longer than expected before the display suddenly refreshed. Instead of revealing an ordinary government record, a restricted notification appeared across the screen. Protected State Executive Record. Verification authorized through supervisory access only. Contact State Security Liaison. Morgan silently read every line before looking toward Jacob. She understood immediately that this stop had entered an entirely different category. She closed the screen to prevent unnecessary viewing and calmly returned Philip's driver's license. "Thank you for your patience," she said. Philip answered with the same quiet professionalism that had never changed. "Thank you for following procedure." Morgan appreciated the distinction. He had not thanked her for believing him. He had thanked her for verifying facts. Seconds later, dispatch transmitted another update. "Sergeant Morgan, communications has confirmed the Attorney General Protective Detail is responding to your location. Estimated arrival is 5 minutes." Jacob stared toward Morgan, confused by what he had just heard. Protective detail? Before Morgan could respond, Philip looked toward the approaching traffic with an expression that remained remarkably composed despite everything that had happened. "It appears," he said quietly, "that the people looking for me have finally found the right road." At that exact moment, 2 dark government sport utility vehicles turned onto the shoulder in the distance, their emergency lights flashing in synchronized silence as they rapidly approached the traffic stop. The 2 dark government sport utility vehicles rolled to a controlled stop several yards behind Sergeant Naomi Morgan's patrol unit, their emergency lights switching off almost immediately after arrival. The doors opened without urgency, and 3 professionally dressed security personnel stepped onto the shoulder with calm precision. Leading them was Special Agent Victor Hayes, a tall black man in a tailored Navy suit, whose quiet confidence came from years of protecting public officials rather than announcing their importance. He briefly surveyed the scene before his eyes settled on Philip Peterson. His posture softened almost instantly. "General," Victor said respectfully, offering a slight nod. "We have been trying to reach you." Philip returned the gesture with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. "My apologies, Victor." Circumstances changed unexpectedly. Jacob Caldwell froze. His attention shifted from Philip to Victor and then back again, trying to understand why a state protection supervisor had just addressed the man he had questioned only minutes earlier with unmistakable professional respect. Sergeant Morgan stepped forward before anyone else spoke. "Special Agent Hayes, I am Sergeant Naomi Morgan. We have an active traffic stop that is still being documented. Can you confirm Mr. Peterson's identity?" Victor reached calmly into the inside pocket of his suit and presented official state credentials. Morgan examined them carefully before returning them. Victor then answered without hesitation. "Philip Peterson serves as the Attorney General for this state. He was traveling to a confidential legal briefing at the Capitol when communications informed us he had become unexpectedly delayed." Jacob stared silently at Philip. The words seemed impossible to connect with the assumptions he had made only moments before. Philip never looked away from him. There was no satisfaction in his expression. There was no anger. Only quiet disappointment that procedure had failed before facts had been allowed to speak. Morgan took a slow breath and immediately shifted into formal procedure. "Mr. Peterson, I apologize for the delay and for the handling of this encounter. We will ensure every aspect of this stop is properly documented." Philip nodded once. "Thank you, Sergeant. Documentation protects everyone." Those words settled over the roadside with unusual weight. Victor's attention then moved toward the damaged Harvard Law diploma cover resting on the hood of Jacob's patrol vehicle. He did not touch it. Instead, he looked directly at Jacob. "Officer, was this document examined after identity verification?" Jacob struggled to answer. "No," Victor continued in the same calm tone. "Was authenticity confirmed before it was damaged?" Jacob lowered his eyes. No, Morgan understood that every answer would become part of an administrative record. She carefully retrieved the damaged diploma cover without attempting to conceal its condition and placed it inside a clean evidence envelope available in her patrol vehicle. "This item will be preserved exactly as it is," she stated. "No further handling." Philip quietly thanked her. Evidence matters because memory can change. Facts usually do not. A gentle breeze moved across the shoulder as passing traffic continued flowing toward the Capitol. The small group of witnesses who had remained nearby watched in complete silence, sensing that the situation had become far more significant than an ordinary traffic stop. Jacob finally spoke, his confidence replaced by uncertainty. "I did not know who you were." Philip answered immediately. "That was never the problem." Jacob looked up. Philip continued calmly. "The problem is that you decided who I was before you knew." No one argued with those words. Even Victor remained silent. Before the conversation could continue, Sergeant Morgan's department radio sounded once again. Dispatch's voice carried a new level of urgency. "Sergeant Morgan, communications has received instructions from professional standards. Preserve all body camera recordings, dispatch audio, vehicle computer logs, and any available witness information immediately. An official administrative review has just been authorized." Sergeant Naomi Morgan acknowledged the transmission from professional standards with the steady composure of an officer who understood exactly what an administrative review required. "Copy," she replied into her radio. "All evidence will be preserved." She immediately instructed another responding officer to secure the scene without interfering with normal traffic, then turned toward Jacob Caldwell. "From this moment forward, every action connected to this stop will be documented. Do not alter or delete anything. Your body camera remains active, your patrol vehicle recording remains active, and all dispatch communications will be preserved." Jacob quietly nodded. The confidence that had defined the beginning of the morning had disappeared, replaced by the realization that every decision he had made now existed beyond memory. It existed in recorded fact. Philip Peterson remained calm, standing beside his sedan, while Special Agent Victor Hayes waited respectfully a few steps away. Neither man attempted to influence the process. Philip simply watched as procedure finally caught up with the truth. Morgan carefully placed the damaged Harvard Law diploma cover into a sealed evidence envelope and documented the time, location, and chain of custody. She then photographed the condition of the portfolio before returning the remaining contents to Philip. "Thank you for your patience," she said sincerely. Philip accepted the documents with a polite nod. "I appreciate your commitment to preserving the facts." Morgan answered quietly. "Facts protect everyone involved." Those words settled over the roadside with unusual significance. A few yards away, the couple who had quietly recorded the encounter approached another officer after being invited to speak. They voluntarily explained that they had observed much of the interaction from the sidewalk and had captured portions of it on their cellular phone. Morgan thanked them for remaining cooperative and informed them that investigators might later request copies through proper legal procedure. The witnesses agreed without hesitation. In the middle of the roadside investigation, another notification appeared on Morgan's secure computer terminal. Body camera synchronization complete. Dispatch audio archived. Vehicle computer activity preserved. Civilian witness information pending. Morgan silently reviewed the notification before closing the screen. Every digital record had begun locking automatically under departmental evidence retention procedures. Jacob noticed the confirmation and quietly asked, "Nothing can be removed now?" Morgan looked directly at him. "That is correct. Administrative preservation prevents changes once an official review has been authorized." Jacob lowered his eyes. For the first time, he understood that the encounter would no longer be remembered according to personal opinion. It would be reconstructed minute by minute through recordings, timestamps, radio traffic, and documented evidence. Philip finally spoke, his voice carrying neither anger nor satisfaction. "Verification systems exist because memory is imperfect. Procedures exist because assumptions can harm people. Jacob listened without interrupting. Philip continued. Every person deserves the same careful process, whether someone recognizes their name or not. Victor Hayes quietly nodded in agreement, but allowed the statement to stand on its own. No lecture could have carried greater weight. Morgan completed her preliminary documentation before stepping toward Philip once more. Mr. Peterson, on behalf of this department, I apologize for the handling of this encounter. The review process will proceed independently, and every fact will be examined. Philip answered with the same calm dignity that had never wavered. I accept your professionalism, Sergeant. Accountability is not about punishment. It is about protecting public trust. Even Jacob understood the distinction. Philip had not demanded revenge. He had asked only that the system function exactly as it was designed. As Victor prepared to escort Philip to the Capitol so he could continue his official duties, another secure message reached Morgan's radio through professional standards. Sergeant Morgan, Internal Affairs has officially opened a formal investigation. Investigators are reviewing incoming digital evidence now, and preliminary findings suggest there may be additional video footage from a nearby business that captured the entire encounter from the very beginning. The following morning, the quiet routine of the Professional Standards Division replaced the tension of the roadside encounter. Inside a secure conference room, investigators assembled every available piece of evidence with the discipline expected of an administrative review. No opinions were entered into the record, only facts. Body camera recordings were synchronized with dispatch audio, patrol vehicle computer logs, and witness statements until every minute of the traffic stop formed a single, uninterrupted timeline. Sergeant Naomi Morgan sat calmly at one end of the table, answering procedural questions with precise accuracy. Officer Jacob Caldwell sat several seats away, noticeably quieter than anyone had ever seen him during his years with the department. The confidence that had once driven every decision had given way to something much heavier. Reflection. Across town, Philip Peterson had already resumed his official responsibilities. His confidential legal briefing had been delayed but successfully completed, and despite repeated suggestions from colleagues that he make a public statement, he declined. He explained that the investigation deserved the opportunity to reach its own conclusions before public opinion reached them first. His decision surprised many people inside state government, but those who knew Philip understood that he had spent his career protecting the integrity of legal process, even when that process had failed him personally. Midway through the evidence review, an investigator received a notification from the Digital Evidence Unit. A nearby law office overlooking the intersection had voluntarily provided exterior security camera footage after learning about the administrative investigation. Unlike the body cameras, which captured only limited perspectives, the elevated security recording overlooked the entire traffic stop from beginning to end. The room became noticeably quieter as the footage appeared on the large monitor. Every movement unfolded exactly as the synchronized timeline had suggested. Philip immediately complied with every instruction. His hands remained visible. His voice remained calm. His requests focused only on verification and procedure. Jacob watched the recording without speaking. For the first time, he observed the encounter from outside his own perspective. He saw himself reaching for the Harvard Law diploma before completing identity verification. He watched himself dismiss Philip's explanation before checking the available information. He saw the moment the protective presentation cover bent in his hands while Philip remained composed instead of argumentative. The silence inside the room became almost impossible to ignore. Moments later, another investigator entered carrying an official response from Harvard Law School. The university had confirmed the diploma's authenticity through its registrar's office, verifying that Philip Peterson had earned his law degree exactly as represented. No uncertainty remained. Every major question raised during the stop had now been answered through documented evidence rather than assumption. Jacob slowly lowered his eyes toward the conference table. No one accused him. No one raised their voice. The evidence required neither. Morgan quietly looked toward him before speaking for the first time since the review had begun. Officer Caldwell, is there anything within the recorded timeline that you believe has been inaccurately represented? Jacob remained silent for several long seconds before answering honestly. No, Sergeant. He paused again before continuing. The recordings show exactly what happened. His admission carried more weight than any argument could have. The lead investigator documented the statement before organizing the completed evidence file. "The timeline is now substantially complete," he announced. "Professional standards will forward the findings to the Departmental Review Board." Jacob understood what those words meant. The investigation had moved beyond gathering facts. Decisions would soon follow. As the meeting adjourned, another notification appeared on the lead investigator's secure tablet. He read it carefully before looking toward Morgan. "The chief of police has reviewed the preliminary findings," he said. "He has ordered a formal administrative hearing, and he has requested that every supervisor in the department attend because this case may result in policy changes that affect the entire agency." The administrative hearing began without television cameras, public speeches, or dramatic announcements. Inside the department's main conference room, the atmosphere reflected the seriousness of a process designed to protect public trust rather than public image. The chief of police sat alongside members of the Departmental Review Board, while supervisors from every patrol division quietly filled the remaining seats. They had not been summoned merely to observe one officer's conduct. They had been asked to witness how one decision could expose weaknesses throughout an entire system. Officer Jacob Caldwell entered the room in full uniform and took his assigned seat without speaking. Across the room, Philip Peterson arrived in the same calm, professional manner that had defined every moment since the traffic stop began. His charcoal suit remained immaculate despite the events of the previous week, and the repaired leather portfolio rested quietly beside him. The damaged presentation cover had already been documented as evidence, leaving the restored diploma protected once again. Philip acknowledged Sergeant Naomi Morgan with a polite nod before taking his seat. The hearing opened with the complete evidentiary timeline displayed on a large monitor. Body camera recordings, dispatch communications, computer logs, witness statements, and security camera footage aligned with remarkable precision. No contradiction remained. Every major fact had already been verified. The review board was no longer determining what happened. Their responsibility was to determine what should be learned from it. Midway through the hearing, the chief addressed Jacob directly. "Officer Caldwell, after reviewing every piece of evidence, do you believe your decisions reflected departmental standards?" Jacob remained silent for several moments before answering. His voice carried none of the certainty heard during the roadside stop. "No, Chief." The room remained completely still. Jacob continued without looking away. "I reached conclusions before completing verification. I allowed assumptions to influence my judgment. The evidence makes that clear." No one interrupted him. His statement became part of the official record exactly as spoken. The chief thanked him before turning toward Philip. "Mr. Peterson, you have the opportunity to address this board if you wish." Philip stood slowly. Every supervisor in the room watched him carefully, expecting anger or demands for severe punishment after everything that had occurred. Instead, his voice remained steady and measured. "I do not believe this hearing should become about one individual alone," he began. "Public confidence depends upon procedures that protect every citizen equally. Verification is not a privilege reserved for important people. It is a safeguard that belongs to everyone, regardless of profession, appearance, or background." Several supervisors quietly lowered their eyes as his words settled across the room. Philip continued, "If this incident changes policy, then something meaningful can come from a difficult experience. Accountability should improve institutions, not simply assign blame." Even Jacob looked toward Philip with visible surprise. He had expected condemnation. Instead, he had been offered something far more difficult to receive: fairness. The review board recessed briefly before returning with its preliminary recommendations. The chief carefully read each proposal aloud. Mandatory verification training would be expanded for every sworn officer. Scenario-based instruction addressing unconscious assumptions would become part of annual certification. Supervisory intervention procedures during identity verification would also be strengthened whenever protected government records delayed confirmation. The recommendations extended far beyond one traffic stop. They reflected a department determined to prevent similar mistakes from occurring again. As the meeting drew toward its conclusion, the chief folded the recommendation packet and looked across the room. "The board has reached unanimous findings regarding policy improvements," he said. "Tomorrow morning, I will announce the department's final disciplinary decision, along with the full implementation plan that will affect every officer serving this community. The room fell silent once again because everyone understood that the hearing had answered how the mistake happened, but the following day would reveal what justice inside the institution would ultimately require. The following morning, every sworn member of the department received the same department-wide bulletin before reporting for duty. The chief of police had signed the final administrative order, concluding the investigation that had begun with what many had first believed was an ordinary traffic stop. The findings stated that Officer Jacob Caldwell had failed to follow required verification procedures before forming conclusions, had exercised poor professional judgment during the encounter, and had mishandled personal property before establishing the facts. The disciplinary action included a formal suspension without pay, mandatory remedial training, continued performance monitoring, and removal from field duties until every corrective requirement had been successfully completed. The decision was neither harsh nor symbolic. It reflected the department's responsibility to preserve public confidence through accountability rather than emotion. During a department-wide briefing later that morning, the chief addressed supervisors and officers gathered inside the training auditorium. "This case is not about the importance of one individual," he said. "It is about the importance of one principle. Every person deserves the same professional process before conclusions are reached. Verification is not an inconvenience. Verification is justice in its earliest form." The room remained silent as every officer understood that the policy changes announced the previous day were now officially adopted throughout the agency. Annual verification training would become mandatory. Scenario-based decision-making would emphasize procedural fairness over assumption. Supervisors would receive expanded authority to intervene whenever unusual identity verification alerts appeared during field encounters. The lesson would become part of every new officer's education for years to come. Jacob listened from the back of the auditorium without attempting to avoid responsibility. The experience had changed him in ways no disciplinary document could fully describe. For the first time in his career, he understood that confidence without humility could become a liability rather than a strength. When his suspension concluded weeks later, he returned to duty under close supervision, determined to rebuild trust one professional decision at a time instead of believing it came automatically with a badge. Across town, Philip Peterson resumed the demanding work that had briefly been interrupted but never defined by the traffic stop. His repaired Harvard Law diploma once again rested inside its familiar leather portfolio, although he now carried it with a slightly different understanding of its meaning. When he later spoke to a classroom filled with aspiring law students, he never mentioned his own experience or identified the department involved. Instead, he told them that the law was strongest when it protected people whose names no one recognized. He reminded them that dignity should never depend upon status, education, or title because the Constitution did not ask citizens to prove their worth before receiving equal treatment. Several students wrote those words into their notebooks without realizing they had been spoken by someone who had quietly lived them only days before. Sergeant Naomi Morgan continued serving with the same professionalism that had earned the respect of both her department and the community. Special Agent Victor Hayes returned to protecting state officials with the same quiet discipline that rarely attracted attention but always earned trust. Ella Lewis resumed managing an office whose daily work continued shaping justice far beyond public view. Life moved forward for everyone, but none of them forgot the lesson hidden inside that morning on the roadside. One officer had believed authority gave him the right to decide who someone was. One man had trusted the process even after the process failed him. In the end, the badge did not lose its meaning because accountability strengthened it, and the Harvard diploma did not prove Philip Peterson's worth because his character had already done that long before anyone verified his name. Justice did not arrive with raised voices or dramatic revenge. It arrived quietly through evidence, procedure, humility, and truth. Because real authority is never measured by the power to judge first. It is measured by the discipline to seek the truth before judgment begins.